Representative. Governor, under the category of alternatives to policing, and I'd like you to respond to this, and then maybe whichever expert up there could talk about it. Is this a category under which forms of defunding police might come under? And secondly, this idea of violence intervenors and problem solvers or social workers pairing with police to respond to some mental health calls. Many of those are domestic situations that escalate very quickly and turn violent. How realistic is it to have a social worker respond with a police officer in real time?
Yeah, I'll let these folks speak to that, but I think it's pretty realistic when we make it work. And I think what I would make the case for is for us not to get trapped. And Carlos, I appreciate you thinking big picture and talking that way on this idea of defunding. What we're trying to envision is, what does public safety look like? What we want to see is that people are safe in their community. What we want to see is that crimes are reduced. We know a lot of the research around this. A lot of this happens on the front end. It happens with economics. It happens with education. But when we get a situation, especially where it's a mental health situation, the example that many of us give, we've seen it because it's a very famous training video that happened in Camden, New Jersey, where we had a mental health situation with someone with a knife that usually would have ended with loss of life. In that case, it did not. So I think the model that comes out of this, each and every community is going to look slightly different depending on what that community wants for their public safety. But I think what this group has made very clear of, sanctity of life and a new way envisioning that. So if anybody wants to talk about how we blend some of this, feel free to, but I think this is where communities will take the lead.
Because for whoever it is, I'm just curious, would it almost require a separate force of social workers and violence intervenors to respond to these calls? And how would that work in practice?
Well, here's what I would tell you is, when it comes to social workers, I've been talking about this forever. I think we talk about Minnesota, and I oftentimes point the rosy picture of where we rank on certain things. You've heard me say this as a teacher, we rank last on school counselors and social workers. So one of the things is of trying to find those people, trying to have them out there and trying to have them integrated into real life. I think it's, imagining that we're going to have a call up and that police are going to rush and social service folks are going to rush. I don't think we're thinking creatively enough to look what our communities look like, what we're asking for. And I think there's a strong argument out of this that if we continue to chase our tails and don't fix the big stuff at the front end, the economic inequities, the educational inequities, those are the things that lead to a lot of these situations. So I don't know if anybody wants to speak specifically. Rena?
So I'm going to give you a concrete solution. So in the city of St. Paul, there were a group of young folks hanging out on 5th Street. They had nothing else to do. We're closing our parks. We don't create jobs and opportunities. Closing, libraries hours are cut in half. They have nothing to do. They're hanging out in downtown St. Paul, getting calls from business owners because they are disrupting, causing, as the business owners would say, causing, chaos for their patriots. And so there's a group of community members, and they called themselves the community ambassadors. And so what they did, they partnered with the police. Instead of the police showing up, taking them down to detention, and making them part of the criminal justice system, what they did was that they would go themselves, someone who looked like them, who they trust and who they trust would show up, become a mentor to them, give them resources, make sure they're doing well in school. And one of the bigger things that happened with this is that the businesses downtown, these community ambassadors worked with the businesses to give these young folks a job. Just a simple job, right? In the beginning, we had the business saying, no, we don't want to work with these kids. No, you just need to get rid of them and, take them in, do what you need to do. But a business took a risk. And another business took a risk. And another one took a risk. And they all gave them jobs. It was just a part-time job, making, minimum wage. But it was something for them to put into their pocket to buy a pair of gym shoes if they needed a pair of gym shoes. Research-based, evidence-based, and what we saw happening was that when I carried this bill a few years ago, it was the business owners who became one of the biggest champions of what was happening with community members leading in the community. Instead of the police coming in in creating this whole system of incarceration, bad attitudes, and all the things that happens when police show up. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about community members working in partnership with the police officer to create the safety that we need and we want in our community. I hope that was helpful.
Chair Mariani, do you have a comment, Governor? I was going to ask Chair Mariani a question, if it's okay.
If I could on this, I just want to add one more point on this, that I think the imagination we're having, and some of you in here, and this group knows this well, but I think some of you have covered this. 15 years ago, I had a chance to meet with Judge Cooper in upstate New York, who had a radical idea on our court system, and they were specialty courts. At that time, it was a veterans court, meaning that our veterans' experiences when they came back should have entered into the VA system, the mental health system, or job training. They ended up in the courts. And the idea of that is the specialty court used outside resources to divert from a system of crime and punishment to a system of healing and moving forward. That has now morphed into the idea of treatment courts, that people end up in our criminal justice system because of addiction issues that come to them or violence. And we start to now, instead of putting them in that situation, we put them on a path to healing. That model was alien to people. And there was the belief, oh, you're letting them off easy. You're letting them off so much easier. It's not easier. It's a different approach to it. And I hope we start thinking that way, if that's how this is the change.